9 out of the 11 top U.S. commanders plead to declassify more documents. This rare move seeks to confront threats from China and Russia. $580 million assigned to upgrade Australia's military. 4 northern military bases will be renovated. China's ambitions expand into space. The Chinese regime is planning to build a permanent space station, and the first section of it launches this week. Once completed, it'll join the International Space Station as one of the only fully operational space stations in orbit. A Chinese internet user has been arrested after posting online about her brother's death. He died shortly after getting a Chinese-made vaccine shot. And a dance used to show loyalty to Chinese dictator Mao Zedong returns to Chinese schools. This time, it's praising the current leader of the Communist Party. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. 9 out of 11 top U.S. military commanders have urged the intelligence community to declassify more files about U.S. adversaries' bad behavior. That's in order to use in the information war against Communist China and Russia. In a memo signed last year, the 9 commanders asked for more evidence to publicize and to combat what they called pernicious conduct. And top U.S. spy chiefs are now saying they are indeed looking for ways to declassify more relevant files. The 9 military leaders were all 4-star combatant commanders. They oversaw the U.S. military in Asia, Europe, Africa, Latin America, as well as special operation troops. According to many government officials, a memo from them was a rare occasion nearly unheard of. Then head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Admiral Phil Davidson organized the memo. Then commander of U.S. Space Command General J. Raymond co-signed it. He is now head of the Space Force and a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Because the 9 of them were all 4-star commanders, this memo is also known as the 36-star memo. The 36-star memo made waves in the Pentagon, the U.S. intelligence community, and Congress last year. Australia is going to spend $580 million to upgrade its military. They'll upgrade 4 northern military bases and expand war games with the United States. Emma McCarthy reports.
Australia plans to spend $580 million to upgrade 4 northern military bases and expand war games with the United States. And it comes amid the country's increasingly bitter relationship with China. Prime Minister Scott Morrison made the announcement on Wednesday. He says Australia must expand its military assets in the Northern Territory to be able to respond to unspecified tensions in the Asia-Pacific.
Our objective here in this part of the world is a free and open Indo-Pacific. Our objective here is to ensure a peaceful region, but one that at the same time Australia is in a position to always protect its interests, always advance our national interests, always support a global world order that favours freedom. And that is something that we share very deeply with our American friends and allies.
The military upgrades will begin this year and will be completed by 2026. They're part of an Australian defence plan that will see Canberra spend $270 billion in the next decade to improve Canberra's long-range strike capabilities. Morrison said last year the funding was needed as the Asia-Pacific region was experiencing the greatest level of economic and strategic uncertainty since World War II.
China is planning to build a permanent space station similar to the current International Space Station. It aims to launch the first piece of the new structure this week. The Chinese Space Station, or CSS, will be made of 3 main sections. When finished, it'll look like a floating T-shaped structure, complete with robotic arms equipped on the outside. The piece launching this week is the core module. The other 2 sections will launch by the end of 2022. By then, the CSS will join the International Space Station as one of the only fully operational space stations in orbit. The CSS is designed to operate for more than 10 years and is less than 1/4 the mass of the International Space Station. But the U.S. Space Command under the Defense Department has raised concerns in light of Communist China's space ambitions. Commander James Dickinson says the top issue is that China plans to use space to overtake the U.S. as the world's military leader. He says China is weaponizing space by integrating space technology with its military. Some of China's space technology may simultaneously have both civilian and military uses. For example, the robotic arms attached to the CSS Dickinson says that in an attack, space-based robotic arm technology could be used in a future system for grappling other satellites. He believes space has become yet another domain for war. The CCP is urging Japan to correct so-called mistakes, and Chinese state-run media are accusing Japan of what they call maliciously attacking and slandering China. So what mistakes are they referring to? On Tuesday, Japan expressed strong concerns over Beijing's military expansion in the region. In an annual foreign policy report, the Japanese Foreign Ministry says the Chinese military is getting more active in the East and South China Seas, and Chinese troops are expanding in a way that lacks transparency. Japanese newspaper Nikkei says this year's report takes a stronger stance against the communist regime compared to last year's. Communist China's ambition to change the status quo at sea is concerning to the international community. To counter the Chinese regime, Japan is coming closer with its allies, including the U.S., Australia, and India. The Quad Alliance is trying to preserve freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific region. Among Japan's allies, the U.S. is the most important. The White House has promised that U.S. military support to Japan applies to the Senkaku Islands. But the Chinese Coast Guard continues to patrol waters surrounding the Senkakus. Beijing disputes Japan's control over the islands and calls them the Diaoyu Islands instead. As tension escalates, Beijing is postponing CCP leader Xi Jinping's visit to Japan. Japan says both sides should focus on containing the pandemic for now, instead of rescheduling the trip. More on Japan-China relations. The Chinese regime is trying to smear Japan with a recreated painting on Twitter. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian posted it on his Twitter page. He mocked Japan in the painting for discharging nuclear wastewater into the sea. Zhao is known as one of Beijing's most aggressive officials. Many have dubbed his aggressive style wolf warrior diplomacy. The original painting is a famous Japanese ukiyo-e by Katsushika Hokusai called The Great Wave of Kanagawa. It depicts Mount Fuji in the background. But Zhao's recreation changed Mount Fuji into nuclear power plants. The waves into skulls and added men in full protection suits on ships, pouring nuclear waste into the sea. The altered picture also has a cross in the sky, making the whole scene look like a huge graveyard. Zhao says alongside the post, if Katsushika Hokusai is still alive today, he too would be very concerned about Japan's nuclear wastewater. The Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs has protested the tweet and is now demanding that Zhao remove it. Earlier this month, the Japanese government decided to discharge its treated and diluted nuclear wastewater into the sea. The U.S. stands with Japan on this decision, but Beijing strongly opposes it. But according to a Hong Kong media, all of the 49 nuclear power units in China have also been discharging nuclear wastewater into the sea. Taiwan is taking action to protect its technology. Its government says the Chinese regime is waging economic warfare against the island's tech sector. Now, lawmakers are considering stronger legislation to prevent that. NTD's Jasmina Davis has the story.
Taiwan is considering stronger laws to stop China from stealing its technology and poaching its talent. Taiwan is home to a world-leading semiconductor industry, and the government has long worried about China's efforts to copy that success, including by industrial espionage and other underhanded methods.
Our Deputy National Security Advisor knows this, what's called reverse engineering, that Chinese companies will reverse engineer a lot of our products with intellectual property rights protection.
In March, Taiwan said a Chinese tech company called Bitmain poached several hundred of Taiwan's research staff by setting up research centers on the island. Authorities searched the homes of 19 executives and engineers who may have been involved. Taiwan's National Security Bureau says China accounts for 48 of 51 cases of industrial espionage by foreign forces since 2013, but only 2 were eventually investigated and prosecuted. Now lawmakers are trying to amend the commercial secrets law to provide stronger protection.
If we want to achieve the deterrent effect, we need to increase the punishment for the crime.
One lawmaker says it's urgent. She said, the infiltration of China's red supply chain is everywhere. It's not clear when or if the amendments could be passed into law. One national security official expressed broad backing for the measure. China's Taiwan Affairs Office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Jasmina Davis, NTD News.
China appears to be sending mixed signals. Amid a dire virus situation in India, Beijing says it will provide assistance. But at the same time, a Chinese state-run airline suspended all shipments of medical supplies to India. India saw a massive virus surge this past week, with more than 300,000 cases daily. Many countries have reached out to provide aid, including the US, UK, and the EU. China seemed willing to help as well. Beijing has already sent over a batch of 800 Chinese oxygen concentrators. Another 10,000 are expected within a week. But on Monday, as per the Times of India newspaper, China's state-run Sichuan Airlines suspended all cargo flights to India for 15 days. The move prevented locals from obtaining urgently needed medical equipment. Traders also complained that Chinese manufacturers upped prices for medical supplies by 35 to 40% and ramped up freight costs by 20%. An Indian reporter asked about the Sichuan Airlines suspension during a Chinese Foreign Ministry press conference. In response, the spokesman told the reporter to check with the airline about the operation of specific flights. At present, some countries have also suspended flights to India, but those temporary pauses don't include cargo flights. Coming up, Chinese vaccines appear to come with some unintended side effects, but not all of them are health-related. One Chinese netizen has been detained after posting online about her brother's death. He died shortly after getting the shot. More on that after the break. The Chinese regime is believed to be silencing the discussion of Chinese vaccine-related deaths on social media. One Chinese netizen is now in custody over an online post saying her brother died after receiving the vaccine. According to Chinese authorities, the country has administered nearly 200 million doses of China-made CCP virus vaccines as of April 19th. But it is unclear how many became ill or died after receiving the jabs. On April 15th, Chinese netizen Ms. Pen made a post on social media. In it, she wrote that her 28-year-old brother died after receiving the Chinese-made Sinopharm vaccine. She advised the public to avoid vaccination in China. Later that night, Pen posted another message shortly after Chinese authorities warned her against announcing these kinds of deaths. Her posts were soon removed. Last Tuesday, local police announced Pen's arrest on social media. Authorities accused her of what they described as causing public panic. They labeled her posts as fake news and rumors. Pen's brother's situation isn't unique. A number of people have died in China and Hong Kong after getting vaccinated. Last week, a South Korean woman died in China 3 days after receiving the Chinese-made Sinopharm vaccine. According to the South Korean consulate in Shanghai, the woman was in her 40s and died at home. As of April 15th, at least 14 Hong Kongers have died after receiving Chinese vaccines. A Chinese holiday season is just around the corner, but some Chinese residents will have to stay at home due to longer than expected lockdowns. NTD's Becky Zhou has the story.
China's Labor Day is usually a time for travels and family gatherings. The public holiday will last for 5 days in China starting this Saturday. But a northern Chinese city is reimposing strict lockdown measures to stop the spread of the CCP virus. Some residents NTD interviewed asked to remain anonymous. That's in order to avoid retaliation from Chinese authorities.
The authorities announced that the town is under lockdown for the second time. People can't go anywhere. The police came here at midnight.
The lockdown announcement came after over 30 local residents tested positive following a local gathering. Many residents became scared because some of the infected residents had previously recovered from the virus weeks ago after receiving treatments. Chinese media reported a confirmed case there last Sunday. A resident of Wangqui town tested positive on January 13th. After over 2 months of isolation, the patient was released. 2 subsequent test results were also negative, but the latest one came out as positive. Local officials said over 30 people are in isolation due to previous contacts with the patient. Wangqui isn't unique in this case. Another Chinese city is in a similar situation. 19-year-old student Mr. Wang returned to China from the UK on February 25th. After arriving in Shanghai, he tested positive. He went to the coastal city of Yantai after recovery, but after staying in a hospital for nearly a month, his test result came back as positive again last Sunday. A local hotel worker said it's business as usual at her workplace. She would say the following to incoming guests.
Did you get vaccinated? We don't require everyone to be vaccinated here. It's not a problem if you haven't done so.
A Chinese citizen posted online expressing concerns that the pandemic will ruin holiday travels next week. Reporting by Becky Zhou, NTD News.
A unique piece of history seems to be repeating itself in China. Students from multiple Chinese schools have begun to learn a particular kind of dance. It was previously only seen during China's Cultural Revolution during the 1960s and 70s. The Cultural Revolution marked a violent socio-political purge in the country. It led to a forced overhaul of much of traditional Chinese culture, replaced with communist ideology. Recent videos popping up now show students performing a dance from that era. It's known to the Chinese people as the loyalty dance. The dance reached its peak of its popularity during the height of the Cultural Revolution. It was used at the time in parades and other settings to show loyalty to China's ruling Communist Party and to the country's then dictator, Mao Zedong. Music paired with the dance praises Mao and his actions. Now the phenomena seems to have returned to China with one key change. Instead of praising Mao, the performance is now directed at current Communist Party leader Xi Jinping. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping has ordered an unprecedented propaganda campaign ahead of the event, reaching all the way down to children in kindergarten. Netizens have voiced worries over children learning the dance. That's because, according to Cultural Revolution history, the next step in the dance is to encourage fighting. That includes urging students to struggle against and physically attack their teachers. Xi Jinping has recently instructed all Chinese citizens to study the Communist Party's history. The directive came as the 2021 edition of a notable Chinese book was released. It's called A Brief History of the Communist Party of China. The publicly available censored version of the regime's history glosses over much of its cruelty and brutality since taking power. It seems to beautify the party's past actions, while comments, instructions, and theory directly from Xi Jinping take up 1/4 of the text. Another intellectual property theft case is heard in the U.S. federal court. A Chinese businessman pleaded guilty during a Wednesday trial in Boston. He was charged with smuggling underwater technology out of the U.S. to help China's military develop submarine drones. Marine biologist Qing Shuren founded a Chinese company that sells specialized tools for studying the ocean. He's since admitted to illegally exporting 60 hydrophones to China, worth a total of $100,000. Those are devices that can monitor sound underwater. Charges against him were first levied in 2018. That's as national security concerns surrounding Beijing's threat to the U.S. were quickly ramping up. The court charged the marine biologist with 10 criminal counts. The charges include conspiring to commit export violations, visa fraud, money laundering, and smuggling. Prosecutors called for a 7-year prison sentence as part of Qing's plea deal. That length of time is on the low end of possible punishments for his crimes. Qing reportedly committed the offenses through a Chinese military research institute called Northwestern Polytechnical University. Prosecutors say researchers there tasked Qing with gathering items used for anti-submarine warfare. He also went through a U.S. manufacturer to obtain hydrophones for the university. Like Qing, the university was also formally accused by the U.S. but did not appear in court. Chinese and other international students will be able to enter the U.S. this fall. The U.S. State Department will expand its national interest exemptions on August 1st. This will allow students from China, Brazil, Iran, and South Africa to attend U.S. colleges. This move may potentially prop up the U.S. economy. In the 2019 school year, Chinese students had an estimated economic impact of nearly $16 billion in the U.S., and they are the largest group of international students in America. In the 2019 to 2020 school year, over 370,000 Chinese nationals attended U.S. colleges. That accounts for 1/3 of the entire foreign student population, nearly twice as high as the second highest, India. The figures are from U.S.-based company, the International Education Exchange. In a statement, the U.S. State Department says it will continue to seek ways to process more visa applications. The European Union, or EU, seems to be hardening its stance on Beijing. It is now calling for more robust measures to counter the Chinese regime. This, according to U.S.-based magazine Politico. They obtained an internal report from the EU. In the internal report, the EU calls CCP head Xi Jinping's changes in recent years an authoritarian shift. This unusual, tough language may indicate the EU's new approach to communist China. The report adds the EU is not very optimistic it can separate business interests with China from its political issues. The EU believes they should closely follow certain topics, such as stability in the South China Sea and rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait. The report also says Beijing has taken a more assertive line over the past 2 years, and it cites issues that have had a negative impact on EU-China relations, including further closure of political space in China, increased social controls, repression in Xinjiang and Tibet, and crackdown on freedoms in Hong Kong. The report also criticizes the Chinese regime for showing little progress in keeping economic promises. That's after Beijing failed to open up digital and agricultural markets and cancel subsidies for Chinese companies. The report points out that EU and Communist China have different values in the digital area. It adds that Europe needs to improve its digital security and its technological base. Beijing is further tightening its grip on education. It's now policing international branches of private schools in China to make sure they are teaching state-sanctioned curriculum. NTD's Don Ma has more.
International private schools are facing restrictions on what their branches in China can teach. As per UK outlet The Times, some of China's 50 British private schools could be relocating. The Chinese regime holds a firm grip on education. It's a tool used to maintain control over its citizens. China's Education Ministry released new regulations last month. It mandated that any school with Chinese students enrolled must adhere to the country's national syllabus. This means that even branches of international schools are expected to teach China's state-sanctioned version of curriculum. The schools are also expected to gloss over politically sensitive topics. For example, the 1989 Tiananmen Square pro-democracy protests. In light of the restrictions, a mainland Chinese resident tells us they have doubts about the quality of education Chinese students can receive. We distorted their voice to protect their identity.
So much time is spent on political classes. The Chinese history and foreign history being taught are all lies. How can you use lies as curriculum? The goal of students is to go to Ivy League schools. But they won't be able to pass the entrance exams for these schools. The caliber of the students will be lowered.
Political classes in China often focus on praising the Chinese Communist Party and its leader Xi Jinping, as well as Marxism and socialism. According to a specialized data provider, foreign curriculum and textbooks are prohibited from being taught to Chinese students up to the age of 15. Some international private schools in China are now eyeing other locations, like Vietnam or Africa. Based on China's 2017 International School Development Report, China ranks first in the world with over 700 international schools in the country. The number is still growing at a rate of 60 to 70 per year. Don Ma, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow. Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.
We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.